The salt air carried the sound of laughter and clinking champagne glasses across the deck of the Malibu beach house. I stood in the kitchen, arranging shrimp on a platter while my father held court on the weathered teak deck outside, gesturing expansively at the ocean view he believed he now owned. "This property has been in our family for 40 years. Dad's voice boomed through the open French doors. "My father built this house with his own hands, and now, finally, it's back where it belongs. With me." 80 family members had driven from across California for what Dad called his new ownership celebration. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Aunts and uncles. My brother Marcus and his wife Jennifer, who'd flown in from Seattle specifically for this moment. Even Great Aunt Dorothy had made the trip from San Diego, her walker carefully positioned beside her deck chair. I was 29 years old, supposedly the family disappointment. While my brother had become a successful corporate attorney, I'd spent the last 7 years playing around with real estate, as my mother liked to say. I lived modestly in a small apartment in Santa Monica, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and rarely talked about my work. "Emma," my mother's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. "The ice is running low. Do something useful for once." I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel. "I'll get more from the garage freezer." "At least she can follow simple instructions," Jennifer muttered to my brother, loud enough for me to hear. They both laughed. The garage was detached, a small structure 50 feet from the main house. As I walked across the crushed shell driveway, I checked my phone. The text I'd been waiting for had arrived 15 minutes ago. "Inspector Davis arriving at 4:30 p.m. Permits ready for review." It was 4:22 p.m. I took my time gathering ice, listening to my father's voice carry across the property. He was telling the story of how he'd reclaimed the beach house, a story that bore no resemblance to reality. "My foolish father left the property to Emma in his will," Dad explained to the captive audience. "A 22-year-old girl, with no sense of responsibility. She let it fall into disrepair. Couldn't even afford the property taxes. So I did what any good father would do. I paid off her debts and took ownership. Today makes it official." Applause rippled across the deck. The truth was considerably different. My grandfather, Robert Harrison, had indeed built this house in 1984. He'd been a master carpenter, and every beam, every window frame, every custom cabinet bore the mark of his craftsmanship. The house was his masterpiece. 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, facing the Pacific, a deck that seemed to float above the sand. Grandfather had watched his only son, my father, grow into a man obsessed with status and appearance. Dad worked in commercial real estate development, the kind that turned beach communities into high-rise condos and turned coastlines into private clubs. Grandfather had despised everything my father's career represented. When grandfather died 7 years ago, he left the beach house to me, with explicit instructions in his will. "Emma understands what this house means. She'll protect it." My father had been furious. He'd contested the will, claiming grandfather had been mentally incompetent. The legal battle had lasted 18 months and cost him over $200,000 in attorney fees. He lost, but Dad never accepted defeat. For 6 years, he tried every method he could devise to take the property. He'd offered to manage it for me. He'd suggested I was too young to handle the responsibility. He'd claimed the maintenance costs would bankrupt me. When I'd refused every offer, he'd started telling people I was letting the property deteriorate, that I was irresponsible, that I didn't deserve grandfather's gift. What my father didn't know was that I'd taken grandfather's gift seriously. Very seriously. I'd been 22 when I inherited the beach house, fresh out of UCLA, with a degree in business and urban planning. I'd also inherited $60,000 in cash. Money grandfather had specifically earmarked for the property's upkeep. I'd taken that money and enrolled in a real estate investment course. Then another. Then I'd obtained my real estate license. I'd started small, a duplex in Culver City that needed work. I'd learned to evaluate properties, to see potential where others saw problems. I'd learned about zoning laws, permits, coastal regulations, tax advantages. I'd reinvested every profit, building slowly and carefully. The beach house had been my education and my laboratory. I'd obtained every permit required by the California Coastal Commission. I'd replaced the aging septic system with an environmentally compliant version. I'd reinforced the foundation against erosion. I'd installed solar panels and a rainwater collection system. I'd done everything by the book, with proper permits, inspections, and documentation. And I'd never told my family any of it. I returned to the kitchen with the ice. Through the window, I could see Dad had moved on to discussing his plans for the property. First order of business, he announced, is banning certain people from the premises. Emma specifically. She's had 7 years to prove herself, and she's failed. As the new owner, I'm establishing boundaries. My mother nodded approvingly. It's time for tough love. Maybe this will finally motivate her to get a real job. Marcus raised his champagne glass. To Dad, finally putting this property to good use. Here, the crowd chorused. I glanced at my phone. 4:28 p.m. My father continued, emboldened by the support. I've already contacted a developer. This single house on a prime lot. It's worth maybe $4 million as is. But with the right permits, we could demolish it and build a modern compound worth $15 million. Maybe 20. Great Aunt Dorothy's face fell. But Robert built this house. It's part of our family history. Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Dorothy. Dad replied. This property's been wasted for 7 years. Time to maximize its potential. What about Emma? My cousin Sophie asked quietly. Doesn't she have a say? Dad's laugh was harsh. Emma forfeited her say when she couldn't handle basic property ownership. I have documentation showing I've been covering the property taxes for 3 years. That gives me legal standing. My attorney has confirmed it. I knew exactly which attorney he meant. Marcus had prepared the documents himself, carefully crafting a narrative of financial dependency and ownership transfer. The documents were impressive. They were also completely fraudulent. I'd been paying the property taxes the entire time, directly from an LLC I'd established in year 2 of my real estate education. The LLC, Pacific Coastal Properties, owned not just this beach house, but 6 other properties along the California coast. My father's documentation would fall apart the moment anyone checked the county tax records. But Dad didn't check. He never checked. He simply assumed that because I drove an old car and lived in a small apartment, I must be struggling. He'd crafted an entire narrative, based on assumptions, and Marcus had built legal documents on that foundation of sand. A knock at the front door interrupted my father's monologue. I walked through the house to answer it. Through the beveled glass, I could see a woman in her 50s, wearing a California Coastal Commission jacket, and carrying a tablet and clipboard. I opened the door. Inspector Davis. Yes. You must be Emma Harrison. She smiled professionally. I'm here for the scheduled permit review. We need to verify ownership for the seawall reinforcement permit application you submitted. Of course. Please come in. My mother appeared in the hallway, her face pinched with confusion. Emma, who is this? This is Inspector Davis. From the Coastal Commission, I said calmly. She's here to review the property permits. You've what? What permits? Mom's voice rose sharply. Your father handles all of that now. Inspector Davis consulted her tablet. According to our records, all permits for this property are registered to Emma Louise Harrison. Has there been an ownership transfer? I'm not aware of. The voices on the deck had quieted. I could feel the attention of 80 family members shifting toward the front door. My father pushed through the crowd, his face flushed from champagne and confidence. I'm Thomas Harrison, the property owner. Whatever permits you need, you can discuss with me. Inspector Davis looked up from her tablet, her expression polite but firm. Mr. Harrison, I'm sorry, but you're not listed as the owner in our system. All permits, and there are quite a few, are registered to Miss Emma Harrison. The property tax records confirm her as the owner of record. Eve what? Deck fell silent. Dad's smile didn't waver, but I saw the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. There must be some mistake. I have documentation. Could I see your documentation, please? Inspector Davis. Tone remained professional. Because according to the county assessor's office, the California Coastal Commission, and the state controller's property tax division, Emma, Harrison has been the sole owner of this property since February 2019. February 2019, I said quietly, was when grandfather's will cleared probate. My father turned to stare at me, and for the first time in 7 years, I saw genuine confusion on his face. You've been paying the property taxes every year, on time, through Pacific Coastal Properties LLC. You don't have an LLC, Dad said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Actually, I do. I established it in 2020. It manages this property and 6 others along the coast. Marcus pushed forward, his attorney instincts kicking in despite his champagne consumption. That's impossible. You live in a tiny apartment. You drive a car that's practically falling apart. You can't possibly. Eve what? Modestly, because I invest my income in real estate, I said. The apartment costs me $800 a month. The car runs perfectly fine. Why would I waste money on status symbols when I could build actual wealth? Inspector Davis cleared her throat. If I could continue with the permit review. I have several other appointments this afternoon. Of course, I said. Would you like to see the seawall reinforcement area? Yes. And I'll need to verify the solar panel installation permits and the septic system replacement documentation from 2021. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. The solar panels, septic system. The old septic was 40 years old and failing, I explained. I replaced it with an EPA-compliant system 3 years ago. The solar panels went in 2 years ago. They generate enough power to run the entire house and feed excess back to the grid. I get a check from the utility company every month. Dad sank into the nearest chair. The permits, he said slowly. All the permits you mentioned. How many are there? Inspector Davis scrolled through her tablet. Let's see. Septic system replacement, solar installation, foundation reinforcement, deck restoration, rainwater collection system, native plant landscaping, and the pending seawall application. 8 major permits. All properly filed. All inspections passed. This is actually one of the best maintained coastal properties in my jurisdiction. Emma did all that. Great Aunt Dorothy's voice trembled with emotion. Robert would be so proud. I felt my throat tighten. Grandfather taught me that owning property means being a steward, not just a possessor. Every improvement I've made honors his craftsmanship and his values. My father stood abruptly. This doesn't make sense. Your bank statements. You've been checking my bank statements, I asked quietly. Marcus had the grace to look embarrassed. We were concerned about your financial stability. You hacked my personal accounts to justify taking my property, I corrected. And what you saw was one checking account I use for daily expenses. You never saw the LLC accounts. You never saw the property management income. You never saw the appreciation on the 6 coastal properties I own, which are currently valued at approximately $18 million. The number hung in the salt air like a physical presence. Jennifer was the first to break the silence. 18 million. The beach house alone is worth 6 million now. After improvements, I said. The property in Laguna appreciated 300%. The Carmel cottage has doubled in value. I bought a small apartment building in Santa Barbara that generates $45,000 a month in rental income. Inspector Davis smiled slightly. Miss Harrison is being modest. She's known in coastal property management circles as one of the most ethical developers in the state. She actually spoke at our annual conference last year about sustainable coastal preservation. My mother sat down heavily. You spoke at a conference about balancing property rights with environmental protection, I said. It's kind of my specialty. My father's face had gone from flush to pale. The property taxes I paid. You never paid them, I said gently. You wrote checks to an account you thought was the county, but Marcus set up a holding account in your name. I have the banking records. The checks bounced. All of them. I've been quietly paying the actual taxes while you both built a paper trail of financial support that doesn't exist. Marcus stumbled backward. That's we were trying to establish. Fraudulent ownership claims. I finished. Yes. I know. I have a real estate attorney, not a family member, an actual specialist, who's been documenting everything for 3 years. We were waiting to see how far you'd go. Inspector Davis looked uncomfortable. Perhaps I should step outside while you handle family matters. Actually, I said, could you complete your inspection? I'd like to get that seawall permit approved. Storm season is coming, and I want to protect the foundation. Of course, she gestured toward the deck. Shall we? I led her through the crowd of silent family members. No one met my eyes. The champagne glasses sat forgotten on the deck railing, condensation dripping onto the weathered wood. The inspection took 20 minutes. Inspector Davis examined the erosion patterns, reviewed my engineering reports, and took measurements of the proposed seawall placement. She asked intelligent questions about drainage and environmental impact. She approved every aspect of my application. You'll have your permit within 2 weeks, she said, as we walked back to the house. And Emma, keep doing what you're doing. We need more property owners who actually care about coastal preservation. After she left, I returned to the deck. The party had deflated like a punctured balloon. Aunt Dorothy was crying quietly. My cousins were checking their phones, suddenly desperate to be anywhere else. Marcus and Jennifer were having a whispered argument near the stairs. My father sat alone at the head of the long teak table, staring at the ocean. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. I really did pay those property taxes, he said finally. I thought I did. You thought a lot of things that weren't true, I replied. You thought I was irresponsible. You thought I was wasting grandfather's gift. You thought I needed to be rescued from my own incompetence. You never said anything. You never told us what you were doing. Would you have believed me? I asked. When I was 22, would you have listened if I'd said I was building a real estate portfolio? Or would you have told me I was being unrealistic? Dad closed his eyes. I would have told you to get a real job. Exactly. So I stopped trying to convince you. I stopped trying to earn your approval. I just did the work. My mother joined us, her perfectly applied makeup streaked with tears. Why the old car? Why the tiny apartment? Why make us think you were struggling? I wasn't making you think anything, I said. You made assumptions based on your values, not mine. You think wealth means displays of status. I think wealth means security and freedom. We measure success differently. Marcus approached cautiously, his attorney persona stripped away. The documentation I prepared. If you report it. I'm not going to report it, I said. You're my brother. You made a mistake. A significant, potentially criminal mistake. But a mistake nonetheless. Why? His voice cracked. After what we did. Because grandfather taught me that family isn't about punishment. It's about truth and accountability. I stood looking out at the family, scattered across the deck. But there need to be changes. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. This house stays in my ownership. The plans to demolish it and build a compound. Never happening. This house is going on the National Register of Historic Places. I've already started the application process. Dad looked up sharply. You can't. I can. And I will. Grandfather built something meaningful here. It deserves to be protected. I turned to address the whole group. However, this house is still a family gathering place. Anyone who wants to visit is welcome. Anyone who wants to help maintain it is doubly welcome. But the toxic assumptions, the financial manipulation, the disrespect, that ends today. Great Aunt Dorothy wiped her eyes. Robert would have handled it exactly like this. I hope so, I said. He taught me everything that matters. The party dissolved slowly. Cousins hugged me with whispered apologies. Aunts and uncles promised to stay in better touch. Sophie asked if she could visit next weekend to help with the native plant garden I'd installed. By sunset, only my immediate family remained. Mom, Dad, Marcus and Jennifer. We sat on the deck as the Pacific turned gold and crimson. The silence heavy, but not hostile. I need to understand, Dad said finally. 18 million in property. How? So I told them. I explained the duplex in Culver City that I'd bought for 300,000, renovated myself, and sold for 550. I explained how I'd used that profit to buy a small cottage in Laguna that the previous owner thought was worthless because it needed foundation work. I explained the Santa Barbara apartment building I'd purchased in foreclosure and brought back to habitability. I explained the hundreds of hours I'd spent learning building codes, studying market trends, attending city planning meetings. I explained the relationships I'd built with contractors, inspectors, and environmental specialists. You did all this yourself? Mom asked. No partners, no investors, just me and the knowledge grandfather gave me about craftsmanship and integrity. I looked at my father. You taught me about real estate too, Dad. You taught me what not to do. Every property you wanted to demolish for profit, every community you wanted to displace for development. I learned to do the opposite. Dad flinched but didn't argue. The beach house, Marcus said. If it's worth $6 million now, and you've put all that work into it, are you going to sell? Never, I said. This is grandfather's legacy. This is where I learned what it means to build something that lasts. This is home. Jennifer spoke for the first time in an hour. I'm sorry for everything I said, for how I treated you. Apology accepted, I said. But Jennifer, if you and Marcus want to rebuild our relationship, it starts with honesty. No more assumptions. No more checking my accounts. No more legal schemes. Agreed, Marcus said quietly. We watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beach house glowed in the fading light, every window and beam exactly as grandfather had designed it, 42 years ago. What happens now? Mom asked. Now, I smiled. Now we have Sunday dinners here, once a month. You help me maintain the garden. We teach the younger cousins about carpentry and coastal ecology. We build something real together instead of fighting over something none of you actually owned. Dad stood and walked to the deck railing. For a long moment, he stared at the ocean. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. Your grandfather saw something in you. I missed, he said. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. I know, I said, and we'll work through it. But Dad, the next time someone in this family does something unconventional, maybe ask questions before making assumptions.
Oh.
He nodded slowly. As darkness fell, we moved inside. I made coffee while Mom started gathering the abandoned champagne glasses. Marcus and Jennifer tackled the leftover food. We worked in comfortable silence, cleaning up the debris of Dad's failed ownership party. Around midnight, as my parents prepared to leave, Dad paused at the front door. Emma, can I ask one more question? Of course. When you spoke at that Coastal Commission conference, what did you talk about? I smiled. I talked about a carpenter who built a beach house in 1984 because he loved the ocean and wanted to create something beautiful. I talked about how real stewardship means protecting what matters, even when it's not profitable. I talked about how the best development is the kind that preserves rather than destroys. You talked about Dad, he said softly, referring to his own father. I talked about grandfather. I confirmed. The whole speech was about him, about what he taught me, about why his values matter more than market rates or development potential. Dad pulled me into a hug, something he hadn't done since I was a child. He really would be proud of you. I hope so, I whispered. That's all I ever wanted. After they left, I walked through the quiet house, running my fingers along the custom cabinets grandfather had built. The wood was still perfect, still solid, still bearing the marks of his careful craftsmanship. I stepped onto the deck and listened to the waves. The seawall permit would come through in 2 weeks. The house would stand for another 40 years, maybe 100. The younger cousins would learn about sustainable development and historic preservation. The family would gather here for Sunday dinners and holidays. And somewhere, I hoped grandfather was smiling. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Can I really come help with the garden next weekend? I want to learn what you know. I replied immediately. Absolutely. Bring work gloves. I'll teach you everything grandfather taught me. Because that was the real inheritance. Not the house, not the property value, but the knowledge that some things are worth more than their market price. Some things are worth protecting. Some things are worth building slowly and carefully, with your own hands and your own integrity. The beach house stood solid against the night, its foundation reinforced, its system sustainable, its future secure, just as grandfather had intended. The week following the disastrous party brought unexpected developments. On Monday morning, I received a call from my cousin Sophie's mother, Aunt Linda, my father's younger sister. Emma, I owe you an apology, Linda said, without preamble. I knew Thomas was planning something, and I should have warned you. I should have said something years ago about how he talked about you behind your back. I poured myself coffee, settling into my small apartment's only comfortable chair. What did he say? That you were wasting Robert's gift. That you were too naive to handle real property ownership. That you'd probably lose the beach house to foreclosure within 5 years. Linda's voice cracked. I believed him, Emma. We all did. And I'm ashamed of that. Why did you believe him? I asked, genuinely curious, rather than accusatory. Linda was quiet for a moment. Because it fit the story we wanted to believe. Thomas is the successful one. The real estate expert. You were the quiet granddaughter who kept to herself. It was easier to believe his version than to question our assumptions. That's honest. I said. Sophie told me about the garden. About how you've been restoring the native coastal plants grandfather originally landscaped. She said, you know every species by name. Every bloom season, every ecological benefit. Linda paused. Robert taught you all that, didn't he? Every Saturday for 10 years, I confirmed. While Dad was at the office building his career, Grandfather and I were building that garden. He taught me that native plants don't just look beautiful. They prevent erosion, support local wildlife, reduce water consumption. I remember, Linda said softly. I remember you as a teenager coming back from the beach house with dirt under your fingernails, and that look of absolute contentment on your face. We thought you were just playing. We didn't realize you were learning. Most people didn't. I agreed. Can I come to Sunday dinner next month? Linda asked. I'd like to learn what you're doing with the property, and I'd like to apologize in person. You're already apologizing now. I pointed out. True. But I want to do it properly, at Robert's house where it matters. I smiled. Sunday dinner is open to anyone who wants to build instead of tear down. You're absolutely welcome. After we hung up, I sat thinking about my family's assumptions. They'd seen what they expected to see, because I'd never corrected them. I'd let them believe I was struggling because their beliefs didn't affect my actual reality. But watching my father's face as his certainty crumbled, that had affected him deeply. On Tuesday, Marcus called. I need to tell you something, he said. About the documentation I prepared. Marcus, I meant what I said. I'm not pressing charges. I know, but you should understand how deep it went. He took a breath. Dad asked me to create a paper trail showing financial dependency. At first I thought he just wanted documentation for tax purposes, but then he started talking about challenging the will again, about proving you were an unfit owner. How long ago? I asked. 3 years, right after you refinanced the Laguna property. I set down my coffee cup carefully. How did you know I refinanced? I'd been monitoring your credit, not hacking, just running periodic background checks. When I saw the refinancing, I told Dad. That's when he started the serious planning. Marcus's voice was heavy with shame. I thought I was helping him. I thought we were protecting family assets from your mismanagement, but you never actually looked at what I was managing. I said. No. I saw the refinancing and assumed debt. I didn't see that you'd used the equity to buy the Santa Barbara building. I saw the LLC and assumed it was some small-time operation. I never actually investigated. Why not? I asked. You're a good attorney, Marcus. Why didn't you do the basic due diligence? Because I'm your older brother, he said quietly. Because in my head, you were still the little sister who needed protecting. Because examining my assumptions would have meant admitting I might be wrong about you. I understood that better than he knew. So what happens now? Now I do better, Marcus said. Jennifer and I talked all night Sunday. She pointed out that I've been treating you like an incompetent child for 7 years while you've been building an empire under our noses. She said I needed to decide whether I wanted to be your brother or your adversary. And what did you decide? Brother, he said immediately. If you'll still have me in that role. Of course, I said. But Marcus, being my brother means respecting my choices. It means asking instead of assuming. It means treating me as an equal, not a liability. I understand. And Emma, your real estate portfolio, I'd like to review it properly. Not to find flaws, but to learn from it. You're doing things I didn't think were possible at your age. They're possible at any age if you're patient and strategic. I said. Grandfather taught me that wealth isn't about speed. It's about sustainability. Will you teach me? Marcus asked. Not as a lawyer looking for angles, but as a brother who wants to understand what his sister has built. Come to the beach house on Saturday, I said. Bring your laptop and your questions. I'll show you the entire operation. That Saturday, Marcus arrived at 9 in the morning, carrying his laptop and a bag from the local bakery. Peace offering, he said, holding up cinnamon rolls. Your favorite. We settled at grandfather's custom-built dining table, and I opened my own laptop. For the next 4 hours, I walked Marcus through every aspect of my real estate portfolio. I showed him the spreadsheets tracking property appreciation, maintenance costs, and rental income. I explained my acquisition strategy, targeting undervalued coastal properties that needed work but had strong bones. I demonstrated my vetting process for tenants in the Santa Barbara building, prioritizing long-term stability over maximum rent. You're leaving money on the table, Marcus observed, looking at the Santa Barbara numbers. You could charge 15% more for these units. I could, I agreed. But then I'd have higher turnover, more maintenance issues, and tenants who resent their rent. Instead, I charge fair rates. My tenants stay for years, and they treat the property with respect. My maintenance costs are 30% below comparable buildings. Marcus made notes. That's actually brilliant. Lower turnover means lower vacancy rates, which means more consistent income. Exactly. Grandfather taught me that being greedy in the short term costs you in the long term. Dad never learned that lesson, Marcus said quietly. No, I agreed. He always looked for the maximum return, regardless of the cost to communities or relationships. We broke for lunch, walking down to the beach with sandwiches. The November air was crisp, the ocean steel gray under overcast skies. Can I ask you something personal? Marcus said as we sat on the sand. Sure. Why didn't you fight back sooner? You had evidence of what Dad and I were doing. You could have stopped it at any point. I considered the question carefully, because fighting back would have meant choosing sides, declaring war on my own family. I didn't want that. I wanted the truth to emerge naturally, by letting Dad humiliate himself at his own party, by letting reality speak for itself. I corrected. Dad built his entire case on assumptions. When the Coastal Commission inspector arrived, she didn't have any agenda. She just stated facts. The facts contradicted Dad's narrative, and the whole structure collapsed. That's actually pretty sophisticated, Marcus admitted. Most people would have confronted him directly. Direct confrontation would have made me the aggressor. I explained. This way I'm just the person who's been quietly doing the right thing while everyone else was making noise. Marcus threw a pebble into the surf. Jennifer said something similar. She said you played the long game while we were playing checkers. I wasn't playing any game, I said. I was just honoring grandfather's legacy and building something sustainable. The fact that it contradicted Dad's assumptions, that was his problem, not mine. We returned to the house and spent the afternoon reviewing the historic preservation application I'd submitted for the beach house. Marcus read through the documentation with growing respect. This is museum quality, historical research, he said. You documented grandfather's construction techniques, his material sources, his design philosophy. You've got photographs from every stage of the original construction. Grandfather kept meticulous records, I said. I found them in the garage 3 years ago, in weather-sealed boxes. Every receipt, every blueprint, every decision explained in his handwriting. And you're donating all this to the State Historical Society. After the house is officially registered, yes, other preservationists can learn from grandfather's methods. His sustainable construction techniques were 40 years ahead of their time. Marcus shook his head slowly. You really did understand what he was trying to teach you. I tried, I said simply. As evening approached, Dad's car pulled into the driveway. Marcus and I exchanged glances. I called him, Marcus admitted. I thought he should see what you've built. I hope that's okay. Dad entered cautiously, like a guest rather than someone who'd claimed ownership a week earlier. Emma, Marcus said you were reviewing business today. I won't interrupt. You're not interrupting, I said. Would you like to see the portfolio? Dad looked surprised. You'd show me. Why wouldn't I? You're my father. You work in real estate. I'd value your professional opinion. We spent 2 hours going through the same presentation I'd given Marcus. Dad asked sharp questions about zoning, development potential, and market positioning. His professional expertise was evident, even as his personal assumptions had been wrong. The Carmel cottage, Dad said, studying the acquisition documents. You bought this in foreclosure for $200,000. The previous owner had let it deteriorate badly. I explained. But the location was prime, and the structure was sound. I spent 6 months doing renovations myself, learning carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. I hired professionals for the technical stuff, but I did everything I legally could on my own. That's how grandfather taught you, Dad said slowly. He always said you couldn't manage what you didn't understand. Exactly. So I learned to understand everything. Dad pulled up the current market valuation. This cottage is worth $800,000 now. Conservative estimate. A realtor friend thinks it could go for $950 in the current market. That's a 400% return in 6 years. Dad said, his professional awe evident. That's Emma. That's exceptional work. Thank you, I said quietly. Dad closed the laptop and looked at me directly. I need to say something. Not as your father, but as a real estate professional to another professional. Okay. What you've built here is more impressive than anything I've accomplished in 30 years in this industry. You've done it ethically, sustainably, and with genuine respect for the properties and communities involved. I'm not just proud, I'm humbled. I felt tears prick my eyes. Dad. Let me finish, he said gently. I spent 7 years convinced you were failing because you weren't following my path. I never considered that you might be building a better path. That was arrogance on my part, and it cost us years of relationship we can't get back. We can build new ones, I said. I'd like that, Dad replied. But I need to earn it. So I'm asking, professionally, do you need a consultant? Someone who knows the development side of coastal real estate? I wouldn't expect payment. I'd just like to learn what you're doing and maybe contribute something useful. I looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Actually, I said, I'm considering a new project. There's a small commercial building in Ventura, a 1920s structure that's been empty for 5 years. The owner wants to demolish it for a parking lot. But I think it could be restored as mixed-use retail and housing. Mixed use is tricky, Dad said, his professional interest clearly engaged. Zoning complications, building code upgrades, accessibility requirements. Exactly. Which is why I could use someone with experience in commercial development. I pulled up the property listing on my laptop. What do you think? Dad studied the listing with the focused intensity I remembered from my childhood, when he'd review properties at the dinner table. After several minutes, he looked up. This could work. But you'd need significant capital, and the permitting process would be brutal. I have the capital, I said. And I'm good with permit processes. What I don't have is experience with commercial tenant relationships and retail lease structures. That I can help with, Dad said. If you're serious about this, I'd be honored to consult. Then let's do it, I said. But Dad, this would be a genuine partnership, not you taking over, not you fixing my mistakes. Actual collaboration. Understood, he said. And Emma, if I start falling into old patterns, treating you as incompetent or trying to take control, you call me on it immediately. Deal? We shook hands across grandfather's table, and something shifted in the room. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of reconstruction. Marcus ordered pizza, and we spent the evening sketching preliminary plans for the Ventura project. Dad's expertise with commercial zoning proved invaluable, while I contributed my knowledge of historic preservation incentives and sustainable building practices. Marcus offered to handle the legal documentation. Around midnight, as we were packing up, Dad paused at one of grandfather's custom cabinets. He built this entire kitchen himself, Dad said softly. Every cabinet, every drawer. I used to think it was a waste of time. Why not just hire professionals and focus on higher value work? And now, I asked. Now I understand, he was teaching you that craftsmanship matters. That doing things right matters more than doing them fast. Dad ran his hand along the cabinet's smooth surface. I wish I'd learned that lesson. You're learning it now, I said. That's what matters. As Dad and Marcus drove away, I stood on the deck listening to the ocean. The beach house felt different now, not just protected, but purposeful. Not just preserved, but actively teaching the next generation. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Mom told me about Sunday dinners. Can I come this week? I want to learn about the native plants. I smiled and replied, absolutely. Come early, and I'll teach you everything grandfather taught me. Because that was the real victory, not the preserved property, or the successful portfolio, but the knowledge passing forward. The understanding that building something meaningful takes time, patience, and the willingness to do the work yourself. Grandfather had built a beach house that would stand for generations. I was building something even more durable, a family that valued substance over status, relationships over returns, and legacy over profit. The November stars appeared above the Pacific, bright and clear. Inside the beach house, every beam and board stood exactly as grandfather had placed them 42 years ago. Some things, I thought, are worth protecting. Some things are worth building slowly. And some things, the most important things, are worth learning from the ground up, one careful lesson at a time. The crystalline chandelier in my penthouse living room caught the late afternoon sun, scattering rainbow fragments across the marble floor. I sat on my custom Italian sofa, laptop balanced on my knees, reviewing quarterly reports from my investment portfolio. 3 years of careful trading, strategic property acquisitions, and one wildly successful tech startup exit had built me a comfortable life at 26. My phone buzzed. Mom. Sweetheart, your father and I are coming over. We need to discuss something important. I glanced at my watch. I have a video conference in 30 minutes. Cancel it. This can't wait. The line went dead. I sighed and returned to my spreadsheet. My parents had always been involved. Overbearing was the kinder term. They'd funded my college education, bought me a reliable car for graduation, and generally assumed that made them stakeholders in every life decision I made. What they didn't know, what I'd carefully avoided telling them, was that I'd paid them back for college within 18 months of graduating, and the starter condo they thought I rented was actually a penthouse I'd purchased outright. The elevator chimed 40 minutes later. I'd learned early that my mother operated on her own timeline. Darling. Mom swept in wearing head-to-toe Chanel, her highlighted hair perfectly coiffed. Dad followed, already loosening his tie. Behind them came a woman I didn't recognize, clutching a leather portfolio. This is Margot Laurent, Mom announced. She's an interior designer. Award-winning. Very exclusive. Margot extended a manicured hand. Pleasure to meet you, dear. I shook it, confused. I'm sorry. What's this about? Mom settled into my sofa like she owned it, gesturing for Margot to sit beside her. Dad wandered to the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands in his pockets, admiring the city skyline view. Your father and I have been discussing your living situation, Mom began. This condo is far too large for one person. The rent must be astronomical. I manage, I said carefully. Well, you won't have to manage much longer, she smiled triumphantly. We've decided to move in. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Excuse me, your father's retiring next year. We sold the house in Connecticut. Too much maintenance, too many stairs. We need a place in the city. She spread her arms wide. This is perfect. 3 bedrooms, that gorgeous terrace, the amenities. We'll take the master suite, obviously. You can have the smaller bedroom. It's still quite spacious. Dad turned from the window. We've already made an offer to your landlord. Very generous. He'd be a fool to refuse. My mind raced. They thought I rented. Of course they did. I'd never corrected their assumption, had never mentioned the closing documents, the mortgage I'd paid off in 2 years, the property deed with my name alone on it. And this is where Margot comes in. Mom continued, oblivious to my silence. We're doing a complete renovation. Very modern, very clean, open concept. Margot opened her portfolio, spreading fabric swatches and floor plans across my coffee table. I'm thinking we knock out this wall between the kitchen and living room. Create flow. And this bedroom, she tapped my current bedroom on the blueprint. He's wasted space for sleeping. Your mother and I discussed converting it into a walk-in closet. Double racks, custom shelving, a proper vanity area. My bedroom, I said slowly, is becoming a closet. A walk-in closet, Mom corrected. There's a difference. Very luxurious. You should see the inspiration photos Margot showed me. Absolutely stunning. Dad joined us, settling into the armchair. I've already ordered new furniture for the entire floor, contemporary pieces. That Danish designer your mother likes. Should arrive in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I repeated. Which means you'll need to pack your things soon, Mom said. We want to start demolition by the end of the month. Oh, and we're replacing this sofa. Too formal. We need something comfortable for entertaining. I looked at the sofa I'd spent 3 weekends selecting, visiting showrooms across Manhattan until I found the perfect piece. Hand-stitched leather, imported from Milan, custom color. Margot flipped through more pages. For your new room, we're thinking minimalist. A simple platform bed, built-in storage. Young people don't need much space anyway. You're hardly ever home, I imagine. Actually, I started. The terrace will be entirely redone. Mom interrupted. I want a proper outdoor kitchen, and a hot tub. Your father's always wanted a hot tub. Dad nodded enthusiastically. Great for my back. We'll need to upgrade the appliances too. Mom continued. Everything here is so basic. I told Margot, top of the line only. Sub-Zero, Wolf, the works. I stood abruptly. Excuse me for a moment. I walked to my bedroom, my soon-to-be closet bedroom, apparently, and closed the door, leaned against it, took 3 deep breaths. This was my home, my investment, my achievement, and they were planning to demolish it. I could hear them through the door, their voices animated as they discussed paint colors and light fixtures. Margot's professional murmur agreeing with every suggestion. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, just to ground myself in reality. The numbers were still there. The property deed was still in my name. This was still mine. I walked back out, composed. I need to step out, I said calmly. I have an errand. Mom waved absently, absorbed in a fabric swatch. Don't be long. We need your input on the bathroom tiles. I didn't realize my input mattered. I said since my bedroom is becoming storage. Oh sweetheart, don't pout. You'll love the new arrangement. Much more efficient use of space. I grabbed my keys and walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby. The doors opened on the ground floor, revealing the black and white checkered marble that always reminded me of a chessboard. Marcus stood at his usual post behind the concierge desk, impeccable in his doorman uniform. Good evening, Miss Thompson, he said, straightening. Then more quietly, is everything all right? Marcus had been with the building for 12 years. He'd been here when I toured the penthouse, when I closed on it, when I moved in. He'd signed for my furniture deliveries, accepted my renovation permits, handed me my mail every day. He knew exactly who paid his salary, or rather, who paid the building fees that included his salary. Marcus, hypothetical question, I said, approaching his desk. If someone tried to buy this penthouse from my supposed landlord, what would happen? His weathered face creased with confusion. Miss Thompson, this building has no landlords. Every unit is owner-occupied. That's part of what makes it so desirable. Right, and if someone, say my parents, called the building management claiming to have made an offer on my unit, understanding dawned in his eyes. I see. Your visitors this evening. I did think it odd when they asked me about lease terms. They asked you about lease terms. Your father stopped at the desk, on his way up. Wanted to know who to contact about taking over your lease. Marcus pulled out a leather-bound ledger. I informed him there were no leases in the building. He seemed confused, but didn't press the issue. I rubbed my temples. They think I rent. They're planning to move in and renovate the entire penthouse. Marcus maintained his professional composure, but I caught the slightest twitch at the corner of his mouth. That does present a problem. They have an interior designer up there right now, discussing knocking down walls. Miss Thompson, you are aware that any structural modifications require board approval, correct? Which requires the owner's signature. I am aware. And you are also aware that you are the owner, also aware. We stood in silence for a moment. Through the lobby windows, I could see the city lights beginning to sparkle as dusk settled over Manhattan. Marcus, another hypothetical. If certain visitors were disrupting the building, what's the protocol? He met my gaze steadily. As head of security, I have authority to remove any individuals causing disturbance or trespassing. At the owner's request, of course. Of course shall I prepare the paperwork, Miss Thompson. I considered, thought about my mother upstairs, gleefully planning to turn my bedroom into her closet. My father, ordering furniture to replace pieces I'd carefully selected. Margot Laurent, sketching demolition plans for walls that were mine. Not yet, I said. But stand by. I rode the elevator back up, listening to the mechanical hum. When the doors opened into my private foyer, I could hear animated discussion from the living room. And here we'll install a wine refrigerator, Mom was saying, built in naturally. I refused to drink warm Chardonnay. I walked in to find them spread across my living room like they owned it. Margot had fabric samples draped over every surface. Dad was on his phone, apparently video calling the Danish furniture designer. Mom stood at the terrace door, gesturing expansively. There you are, she said. We've made so many decisions. You're going to love it. Am I? Absolutely. Margot had this brilliant idea for the entryway, a complete redesign. Very zen. Very minimal. I looked at my entryway, where I'd installed custom wainscoting and a vintage credenza I'd found at an estate sale in the Hamptons. We'll need to coordinate with the building. Of course, Margot said, consulting her notes. Permits for the structural work, approval from your landlord, that sort of thing. I have a contractor who specializes in rental renovations. Very discreet. Rental renovations, I said. Yes, well, obviously you can't make major modifications without the owner's permission, but I'm sure once your landlord sees our plans, they'll be thrilled. It will increase the property value enormously. Mom sat back down, patting the sofa cushion beside her. Come, sweetheart, let's discuss your new room. I know losing space is difficult, but think of it as simplifying. Very trendy right now. I remained standing. When exactly did you plan to inform me about all this? We are informing you, right now. No, I mean before you hired a designer, and ordered furniture and planned to demolish my home. Mom's expression tightened. Don't be dramatic. We're not demolishing anything. We're improving. Without asking. Darling, you're 26 years old. You live in a rental that we're quite certain is beyond your means. We've been worried sick about your finances. Have you? Of course, that startup you worked for. What was it called? Something ridiculous with too many vowels. It folded, didn't it? It was acquired, I corrected, by a major tech company, very successfully. Mom waved this away. Semantics. The point is, you've been struggling. We've seen the signs, the vague answers when we ask about work, the way you never want to discuss money. Perhaps I don't discuss money, because it's none of your business. You're our daughter. Everything about you is our business. She stood smoothing her skirt. Now we're trying to help. We're offering you a place to live, rent-free. All you have to do is accept the smaller bedroom. Most young people would be grateful. Dad ended his call and joined the conversation. The furniture designer is very excited. He's offering us a 20% discount for doing the entire floor at once. How generous, I said. We thought so. Top quality pieces. An investment. Speaking of investments, I said carefully. Have you actually contacted my landlord? I left 3 messages with the building management. Dad said, no response yet. Rather unprofessional, if you ask me. And you offered them what? Exactly. Market rate plus 10%. Very fair, considering the current market. I showed them our financial statements. We're more than qualified tenants. Margot interjected. Once we complete the renovations, this unit will easily be worth 30% more. The landlord would be foolish not to negotiate with serious buyers. I walked to the window, looking out at the view I'd purchased. The city stretched before me, millions of lights beginning to glow in the gathering darkness. I'd worked so hard for this. 80-hour weeks at the startup, weekends spent learning to code, to trade, to invest. I'd built something from nothing. And now my parents were planning to tear it down without even knowing it was mine. Mom, Dad, Margot, I said, turning back. I need to tell you something. If this is about the bathroom tiles, I promise the marble is authentic. Margot said quickly. It's not about the tiles. Mom sighed. Sweetheart, if you're going to complain about the closet situation again, I'm not complaining. I'm informing you that you can't convert my bedroom into a closet because you don't own this penthouse. Of course we don't own it yet, Dad said. That's why I'm negotiating with your landlord. There is no landlord. Silence. Margot flipped through her papers. The building management said, The building management told you that every unit is owner-occupied, because it is. Mom's laugh was nervous. That's ridiculous. You couldn't possibly afford. I pulled out my phone and opened my documents folder, scrolled to the property deed, held it up. Penthouse 3, 847 Park Avenue. Owner Alexandra Marie Thompson. Purchase date April 2023. Mortgage paid in full. September 2024. Dad took the phone from my hand, squinting at the screen. His face went pale. This is how did you? The startup I worked for. It was acquired for $200 million. I had 3% equity. Do the math. Mom's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. After taxes, I cleared just over $4 million. I continued. I paid you back for college. That was $200,000. I bought this penthouse for $1.8 million. Cash. I invested the rest. Conservative portfolio. Some aggressive trading. A few angel investments. Current net worth is approximately $7.2 million. Margot quietly began gathering her fabric samples. You never said anything. Mom whispered. You never asked. You assumed I was struggling. You assumed I needed help. You assumed this wasn't mine. Dad slowly sat down, still holding my phone. 7 million. Point 2. Approximately. All this time. All this time, you thought I was barely making rent, living beyond my means, needing my parents to swoop in and save me. I took my phone back. Instead, I bought a penthouse at 24 and paid it off at 25. I'm doing fine, Mom. Better than fine. Mom sank onto the sofa. My sofa that she'd planned to replace. Why didn't you tell us? Because of this. Because the moment you knew I had money, you'd want to be involved. Have opinions, make decisions. I gestured at Margot, who was edging toward the elevator. Case in point, we're your parents, Dad said weakly. You are. And I love you. But this is my home. Mine. I bought it. I designed it. I chose every piece of furniture, every paint color, every fixture. This isn't a rental you can take over. This is my achievement. Margot had reached the elevator. My consultation fee can be waived. Given the circumstances, that won't be necessary, I said. My parents will pay your fee for today. Consider it a lesson in assumptions. The elevator doors closed behind her. Mom's face crumpled. We were just trying to help. By taking over my home, without asking. By planning to demolish my bedroom. By assuming I was too incompetent to manage my own life. We didn't know. Exactly. You didn't know, because you never asked. You never once said, hey, how are you really doing? How's work? How did that startup exit go? You just assumed. Dad set my phone carefully on the coffee table. The messages I left with building management were probably very confusing, since there's no one to lease from. Marcus mentioned you asked about lease terms. Marcus, the doorman, who you walked past twice without acknowledging, who's been here for 12 years, who knows exactly who owns every unit in this building. Mom pulled a tissue from her purse, dabbing at her eyes. Genuine tears, I noted. Not the manipulative kind she deployed when she wanted Dad to buy her something. I'm so sorry, she said quietly. We've been terrible. Pretty terrible, I agreed. We worry. You're our only daughter. You never share anything with us. You thought I was failing. Drowning. Needed rescuing. Yes, she admitted. And instead you're $7 million. Point 2. Dad laughed suddenly. A sharp bark of sound. Our daughter is a multimillionaire, and we tried to turn her bedroom into a closet. Walk-in closet, I corrected. There's a difference. Very luxurious. He laughed again, harder this time. Mom started giggling too, though tears still streaked her makeup. And then I was laughing, because it was genuinely absurd. My parents, planning to renovate my penthouse, hire contractors, install a hot tub, all without knowing I owned the place. When the laughter faded, we sat in silence. The chandeliers sparkled above us, throwing rainbow light across the walls they'd wanted to knock down. Can we start over? Mom asked finally. Properly this time. What does that look like? We ask questions. We listen. We treat you like the successful adult you clearly are, instead of the struggling child we imagined. She twisted her tissue. And maybe you tell us things. Share your life with us. I considered this. Why didn't you tell us about the startup sale? Because the moment I did, it would become about what you thought I should do with the money. Invest conservatively, buy bonds, set up trusts. I wanted to make my own decisions, and you have, Dad said, looking around the penthouse with new eyes. Very successfully. I have. We're proud of you, Mom said. I need you to know that, even though we've done a terrible job of showing it, we're incredibly proud. Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. Thank you. This penthouse, Dad said. You chose all of this yourself. Every bit. It's beautiful. Really beautiful. The view alone. That's what sold me. I saw it and knew I had to have it. Mom stood, walking slowly through the living room, as if seeing it for the first time. She paused at the bookshelf I'd had custom built, running her fingers along the spines. You always loved to read. I remember. I still do. She moved to the terrace door, looking out at the city lights. I really did want a hot tub for your father's back. There's a spa in the building. Residents only. It has a hot tub. Oh, she turned back. We really did sell the Connecticut house. Why? Too big. Too empty. Your father's retiring, and we wanted something smaller. Closer to the city. Closer to you. Honestly, you could have asked if I wanted you closer. Would you have said yes? I thought about it. Probably not, but I would have appreciated being asked. Dad joined Mom at the terrace door. They stood together, silhouettes against the glowing city, married 35 years, still holding hands. There are other apartments in this building, I said. Smaller units, 2 bedrooms. They come up occasionally. Mom turned, hopeful. Really, the penthouse on the second floor sold last month. I know because I get the building newsletter. 2 bed, 2 bath. Great light, no city view, but it overlooks the park. That sounds perfect. It would require actually buying it though. No landlords to negotiate with. Dad smiled ruefully. Message received. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. The building has a broker who handles most sales. I can make an introduction if you're seriously interested. We're interested, Mom said quickly. Very interested, if you wouldn't mind having us in the same building. I thought about Sunday dinners without the 2-hour drive, impromptu coffee visits, being able to help if they needed something as they aged, having them close, but not suffocatingly so. I wouldn't mind, I said, as long as we establish some boundaries. Like what? Like you can't just show up with interior designers to redesign my home. 8. Fair. And you have to acknowledge that I'm capable of making my own decisions. Also fair. And you have to actually talk to me, instead of assuming you know what's going on in my life. Mom crossed the room and pulled me into a hug. She smelled like Chanel No. 5. The same perfume she'd worn my entire life. We can do that. All of that, I promise. Dad joined the hug, making it a family sandwich. We really are sorry, sweetheart. I know. When they pulled back, Mom's makeup was thoroughly smudged, and Dad's eyes were suspiciously bright. So, I said, want the actual tour? I'll show you what the penthouse actually looks like, instead of what Margot Laurent imagined it could be. We'd love that, Mom said. I walked them through each room, explaining my choices. The kitchen where I'd splurged on Italian marble countertops. The master bathroom, with the soaking tub that overlooked the city. My office, where I managed my investments and monitored my portfolio. The terrace where I grew herbs and tomatoes in summer. They asked questions, real questions, about the design process, the renovation challenges, my investment strategy, my work-life balance. They listened to my answers. In my bedroom, the room they'd wanted to convert, Mom paused at my dresser. A photo sat there in a silver frame, the 3 of us at my college graduation. I was grinning, diploma in hand. They stood on either side of me, beaming with pride. We love you, Mom said quietly. We've always loved you. We just got lost somewhere along the way. Started treating you like a project instead of a person. I know, I said, and I could have been more open, shared more, instead of hiding everything to avoid your input. Fresh start. Dad offered his hand. I shook it. Fresh start. We returned to the living room. Dad checked his watch. We should go. Let you get back to your evening. I'm sure we've disrupted enough. Actually, I said. Have you eaten? There's this Thai place that delivers. We could order in, catch up properly. Mom's face lit up. We'd love that. I pulled out my phone to place the order. Fair warning. I'm paying. Multi-millionaire's privilege. Point 2 multi-millionaire. Dad corrected with a grin. Approximately, I added. While we waited for food, I called Marcus on the internal building line. Miss Thompson, he answered professionally. Marcus, false alarm on that earlier discussion. My parents won't need to be removed. I'm pleased to hear it. And the renovation plans, cancelled. Though I may need that broker's contact information for a potential sale. I'll have it sent to your email. Within the hour. Perfect. Thank you, Marcus. My pleasure. Miss Thompson, have a pleasant evening. I ended the call to find my parents watching me with identical expressions of curiosity. What? I said. You really have built a whole life here. Mom said. Friends in the building. Relationships with the staff. An actual home. I have. It took time, but I did it. Without our help. Dad added. Without your knowledge, actually. But yes, the food arrived. We spread it across my coffee table. My custom Italian coffee table that was absolutely not getting replaced by Danish furniture. And talked. Really talked. They told me about their retirement plans. Their fears about aging. Their reasons for selling the house. That went beyond maintenance and stairs. I told them about my angel investments. The tech companies I was watching. My thoughts on maybe starting my own venture someday. It was close to midnight. When they finally left. At the elevator, Mom hugged me again. Tomorrow I'm calling Margot to apologize, she said, and pay her full fee. Add a generous tip. I suggested. We traumatized her. We did, didn't we? She smiled. Your father and I will look at that second-floor penthouse. If it's still available, I'll make the introduction. And maybe Sunday dinner. Dad asked. Our treat. We'd love to hear more about your investments. Sunday dinner sounds good. They stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, Dad called out, We're proud of you, Alexandra. Truly proud. The doors shut. I stood alone in my foyer, surrounded by the silence of my penthouse, my home, my achievement, my space. I walked to the terrace, stepping out into the cool night air. The city hummed below, alive with light and motion. Somewhere in Connecticut, my parents were driving back to a hotel, processing the evening's revelations. Somewhere in Manhattan, Margot Laurent was probably telling this story to her designer friends. And here I stood, in a penthouse I'd bought at 24, looking out at a city I'd conquered quietly, without fanfare or announcement. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. Thank you for not having us removed by the doorman. We love you. I smiled and typed back. Love you too. Even when you tried to turn my bedroom into a closet. 3 dots appeared. Then walk-in closet. There's a difference. I laughed and pocketed my phone. Tomorrow I'd send the broker's information. Tomorrow I'd start the process of having my parents as neighbors instead of distant worriers. Tomorrow I'd figure out what boundaries looked like when family lived 2 floors down. But tonight I stood on my terrace, in my penthouse, in my city, and felt nothing but gratitude for the life I'd built, and the family who'd finally started seeing it. The end.